a little bit about my background and experience. I really have spent my career in change, transformational change that led into leadership development. So I had a career in consulting at Pricewaterhouse and Coopers and Lybrand before moving internally with Coca-Cola, and then later to Microsoft, where I then started leadership development for the sales part of the organization, and then later created high potential leadership development for the company. And through that, I've had this really interesting kind of dance around change with respect to being the external consultant suggesting and guiding change to the internal consultant, realizing just how difficult implementation can be when we especially have to take into account company politics. And then finally being a leader who was responsible for leading and implementing a global change myself while I was at Microsoft. And, you know, the reality is I look at this current situation as really just a massive kind of event that's creating a lot of uncertainty and change in the system. And so for me, you know, what's interesting about this is that I just realized more and more as I speak with people that we're all kind of maneuvering through the change curve in kind of at our own pace, and we're in different places and we're iterating as new information comes up, and some of that enables us to really move into more acceptance, whereas other pieces get really frustrating. The other aspect of this is that we're all learning how to maneuver this in, you know, a very different environment. So while I've been working virtually since 2008, I work virtually for the most part from home and when no one else is around. Now I have to share my bandwidth with others. And like I love today, I'm sitting outside, but I also have my neighbors to consider and my dog that might start barking. And so I have to manage all of those expectations as well. So it's a different situation than I normally have. So my intention for today is to really think about what do we have to do to manage ourselves, but more so, what do we have to do to manage the people and our teams around us? And so I used this, you'll notice on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll notice a piece of artwork that I have in my office, which is what basically was the impetus for me being involved in the conversation that we're having today. And it comes from Mandy Hale, and simply when nothing is certain, anything is possible. So my personality type is to look for what is possible. And so I'm very, very excited to be a part of the YOL Work From Home Wellbeing Series. I'm one of 10 individuals, as you are aware, involved in this process, and I'm really grateful to David for putting it together. And I also wanted to let you know that when we're done, I'll indicate, I'll share some information about the session tomorrow, but also wanted to let you know that all of my slides will also be available to you. So David will send those out, or I will send those out, either way. So I'm going to take you through some slides. We're also going to do a very, very short guided meditation in kind of as we get started. And really, my primary focus is this being a conversation. So feel free to ask questions at any point in time as we move forward. Maybe as we move forward. So we're going to be talking about several things at the end. We won't be going into it. We have some tools and an appendix. That's what will come in the slide content. But we're really going to be focusing on kind of what's going on mentally and emotionally, what is both our universal as well as individual response to change, and how we manage our teams. So first, you know, what the heck is going on? Well, we obviously know we're in the midst of a pandemic. It's an event. It's a big trigger in our lives that's raising a lot of emotions for us that cause us to react or respond, depending on how we view it. There's often a lag between our actions and how they are perceived by others as a potential event or reaction or trigger. But these things kind of iterate together, and they can become a vicious or virtuous cycle. I don't know if you have seen this before. It's based on David Roth's work. He's with the Neuro Leadership Institute. He founded that. And he talks about triggers as being something that impacts us and impacts our brain in some very specific ways. This is what is known as the SCARF model. These triggers that fall in the areas of status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness either move us toward a reward response or they move us toward a threat response. What's interesting, though, is that 5 times the real estate in our brain is dedicated to threat versus reward. So if you find yourself gravitating to want more information about what's going on with the pandemic, that's completely normal. Because what's happening is all of those threat centers are being triggered within the brain. We're looking for more information. We're looking for more certainty. What we know right now is that there are 3 of the 5 that are really on high alert right now: certainty, autonomy, and relatedness. And so what happens for us is that in the absence of those, we are going to move into some responses that don't enable us to be at our best all the time. And that, of course, impacts others. And what we want to do is figure out what can we do for ourselves and for others to help increase certainty, autonomy, and relatedness so that we can move more into the reward responses of our brain. So, of course, when the threat is more intense, then the response is also more intense. Now, what you have to keep in mind with this is that just like if a tiger showed up in front of you, that's on my mind right now because I've been watching Tiger King. But if a tiger shows up in front of you, what's going to happen? Well, you are going to go into high alert. And you're going to become very focused on your own survival, and that actually causes you to narrow your perception, cognition, creativity, and collaboration. Now, that's fine if it's about a tiger and your physical survival, but today most threat is social, it is not physical. And so what's the impact when the threats around us are getting in the way of us being the best, kind of being at our best and being the best employees we can be? You know, feeling threatened doesn't enable us to be that creative or collaborative. And so we need to be conscious of that so that we can take some action. So some of the things that I share with my clients is first, you have to, just like they talk about in the airplanes, right? You have to first put on your own mask before you put on someone else's mask. So I say, you know, you have to take care of yourself first, obviously, but then after taking care of yourself, it's also time for you to check in with your team and figure out what can you do to help them. So I'm just going to highlight a few of these before I go into a little bit of the change, talking about the universal response and individual responses to change. 4 square breathing I'm going to demonstrate in just a moment. It's one of my favorites. It's really easy. So, but these are some things that you can do to open up more of the reward centers in your brain. So breathing enables you to center, to reduce anxiety. Expressing gratitude, I recommend to people, hey, keep a gratitude journal. Write down 3 things at the end of every night that enable you to feel grateful for your day. And what are those things? Because that, again, opens up the reward center of the brain and enables you to be more collaborative, creative, etc. Drop into your own presence and ask simply, what can I do right now? When everything might feel out of control around me, what's my next step? And then the 4th one, I just recently heard from Michael Gervais, who is the positive psychologist who works with the Seattle Seahawks, is creating a morning mindset routine where before you even get out of bed, the first thing you do is take a deep breath, center yourself, think of one of those things that you wrote down the night before that you can express gratitude for. Start your day with that. Then get yourself out of bed and plant yourself fully on the floor and feel the ground, the floor beneath you. To center yourself before you pick up that phone, hop in the shower, get yourself a cup of coffee in your autopilot mode. It's just a different way of starting your morning. So I loved that. And then for your team, I work with a lot of folks, and I had a really interesting story last week with one of my clients who works in tech, and she's managing a team of several individual contributors who are also in their 20s and 30s and living alone. And she's been trying to check in with them. She noticed their anxiety seems quite high right now. They're sheltering in place, but nobody's, you know, around them. And so we talked about how just having a regular, maybe 10 a.m. team check-in enables people to know I have a little bit of certainty around something that's going to happen every day and somebody actually knowing where I am. I think we've all heard very sad, unfortunate stories about, you know, people being really impacted and even terminally impacted by this virus, and they were all alone when it happened, and somebody found out later. And sometimes it was only 2 hours later, but it was too late. And so I think that's part of what we want to help is reduce some anxiety by creating certainty. Somebody has my back. Every day, if I don't show up at 10 o'clock, they're going to wonder about me. The other thing I've suggested to my clients is spend more time writing things down to create clarity. We're all kind of sitting in a fog, and as a result of sitting in the fog, you might tell me something, but it doesn't mean I remember it really well. I have too many distractions, too many things that are concerning me. So spend more time writing down what you think is most important. And then you can create mindfulness moments for your teams and those around for you. And I really think of these as moments. So when we talk about meditation, we often talk about, you know, spending some good time in meditation on reflection. But we can also do this in moments. And I'm going to demonstrate that in just a moment. The last thing that you'll see here is that if you're interested in knowing about your own scarf drivers, we all have our favorites. You can go to the Neuro Leadership Assessment and take the assessment for free and learn what your primary drivers are. So for example, I know autonomy, having some control over my environment, and relatedness are my two highest scarf triggers. So social distancing, physical distancing from others is challenging for me. I am less concerned about the lack of certainty, but I'll explain a little more about that later because it has to do with my own individual response to change. So what I'd like to do is share one mindfulness moment that I've done with some of my teams. And to do that, I wanted to show you a book. And Brian, you live in this area, so I don't know if you've ever met Posey Garing, but I love her book, The Next You. And the whole focus on the book is basically 1 to 3 minute meditations. So I thought I would combine this with my favorite, easiest meditation called 4 Square Breathing. And then I picked one for all of us that I'm going to read. So I'm going to explain it before I start the meditation. So Posey has about 50 of these where she gives you the limiting thought that might be getting in your way. And then she gives you the 1 minute transformation. So what I'm going to do is first go through the 1 minute limiting thought description, drop us into 4 Square Breathing, and then do the 1 minute transformation. All right. Before I do that, though, I thought I would just pause and see if there are any questions so far. So if you have a question, feel free to take yourself off mute.
What's the author's name that you were describing of the 1 minute meditations?
Yeah, it's Posey Garing. You spell it P-O-S-Y is her first name, and her last name is G-E-R-I-N-G. And I'll put that as a snapshot of the book as one of the resources in the toolkit. Oops. Hold on just a moment. Somehow I seem to have lost my share. There. So we're going to try this together. So first I'm just going to describe how Posey describes this particular one, called I'm Stuck in My Worst Fears. So I hope that none of us are really stuck in our worst fears, but we're probably stuck in some of our fears right now. So she describes it like this. Sometimes things don't feel like they're going to be okay. You feel crushed by circumstances. The only apparent choice is to let the situation squash you or run as fast as you can. These strategies lead to trapping yourself in your worst fears. One secret to getting out is to be curious. Curiosity is the WD-40 for easing unmovable objects and thoughts. Your mind is programmed to respond with fight or flight, but responding to challenges in life today requires more options. You start finding more by noticing and reversing your automatic assumptions, such as I know, or I must control, or this is the way it is. Even by consciously thinking, I wonder, or I'm curious, you'll feel a physical change in your brain. It relaxes and opens. Curiosity cuts off the death spiral of your assumptions and slows your racing thoughts. When you follow your curiosity, I wonder, becomes a state of wonder, which leads to wonderful and takes you to a long way from disaster. So that's the description of it. I love where she's looking in this. It's very aligned with what we heard in the SCARF model. And so what I'd like you to do is start by, we're going to look at 4 square breathing. So if you're online and you're looking at the screens, you can follow the square that's in front of you. If you're just on the phone and outside and enjoying the day, then I'm going to describe it. What I would like you to do is think about drawing a square in your mind. You would start in the bottom left-hand corner, move up to the upper left-hand corner while you're inhaling on the count of 4. Then you would hold that as you move from the upper left-hand corner to the upper right-hand corner. Hold it for the count of 4, and then you would exhale going down from the top right-hand corner to the bottom right-hand corner, counting to 4. And then you would close the square by holding that exhale as you count to 4 again, from the bottom right-hand corner to the bottom left-hand corner. So I'm going to walk you through this 3 times, and then I'm going to drop into Posey's 1-minute transformation for I'm stuck in my worst fears. So let's begin with inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. Now what I'd like you to do is pause, settle, open. Consider a challenge you have in your life. Now imagine you're a being from a planet with an entirely different set of physical laws, such as gravity, number or placement of eyes, or lifespan, who has just landed on Earth. Allow yourself to become curious about your challenge from this frame. Examine it as someone who has no knowledge of its symbolism or consequences and is trying to learn as much as you can about your new environment. What are its boundaries? How would it be useful? What does it respond to? Where does it lead? What can you learn from it? What else are you curious about in terms of your challenge? how might you, in your alien form, resolve your challenge? And now on a count of from 3 to 1, I'll ask you to open your eyes again, feel refreshed, and re-engage in our conversation. So 3, 2, 1. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I do. I'm just curious if anybody had any questions about it. Okay, then I'll assume that you don't, and we will move forward. So the next part of our conversation is about how we as human beings respond to change. And the important thing here is that change is really a process. It's not an event. When we think of change, you know, it's basically something old stops and something new begins. So that day in December, I can't remember what day it was, December 18th, when maybe it was when the virus was first discovered, for example. The day before, nobody knew the virus existed. And then on the day that it was diagnosed, all of a sudden something new began. And at first it was quite small, but it had changed. Our world had changed. And so sometimes we think of these changes as events or trigger, or they're the event or trigger, but they have a very discrete kind of start and stop and start date. So unexpected circumstances like our current pandemic, but they can also be things like a new job or a boss, you know, a merger or acquisition, something personal going on in your life. Maybe you just got married or had a baby, or you're going through a divorce. Maybe you had a health event. Personal things will also act as these changes. And then finally, something like as simple as working from home, finding a new way of navigating in the world. That's the change that happens, and it starts on a day. But what really gets in our way is that psychological reorientation to the change. So I think many of us are still kind of going through that. And then, you know, we just found out in the state of Washington, we were sheltering in place for a couple of weeks, and that got extended. And now yesterday, my daughters just found out that they won't have school or in-person school classroom training as they're used to for the remainder of this year, for the remainder of this academic year. And so, you know, we keep getting new levels of the change being raised for us. And so our universal response to change really comes from the work of Kubler-Ross, and also then brought into business through Daryl Connor's work on managing at the speed of change. This is the grief curve. And there are, here you notice 6 primary stages. Depending on the way you look at it, there can be more or less. But it looks kind of like this, where if you're online, you think of it as a check mark. With the lower part of the check mark, you know, when we write a check mark, we usually have the lower part on the left, and then we make our V, and then we put the big curve up to the right. And that's what it looks like. And these stages that we go through, everybody goes through them, but we go through at our own pace. So we start out first in that state of denial. Oh, that's not happening to me. I remember even when I first heard about the virus, I thought, there's this little niggling fear that it could end up over here. Because when we had H1N1, I actually got H1N1 in late 2008, early 2009. And so I had this little bit of fear, but I was like, that's happening over in China. It sounds like they've got it under control. So a little bit of denial. But then it impacts us, and you start to have, you know, other feelings associated with it. It's changing the way I do things. And you might start to feel frustrated, annoyed, irritated, maybe even angry. But what's interesting is when we move from that stage into bargaining, we're going to see a decline in productivity, but at the same time, bargaining is our first step toward acceptance. It tells us, I'm trying to work out a better deal for myself. Is there a way that I can still get away with some of the things I want with respect to this change? But if that doesn't work so well, then we probably end up in a depression. it's what I call the pit of despair. Things aren't going quite the way I wanted them to, and now I'm just going to have to deal with that, deal with my lot in life, so to speak. But when we move from depression and we begin to move into testing, that's when our productivity starts to change. It increases. And finally, we move into acceptance. Now, what's really interesting about the universal response to change is, first of all, people go through it at their own pace, and we also iterate. So I could find myself in acceptance, and then all of a sudden I'm back to anger because there was a new element. I saw that happen in my house yesterday, where, you know, my 14 and 16-year-old found out they're not going back to school before the end of the year, and they were really frustrated with that. And one actually moved into depression quite quickly and was crying because, again, now there's a new aspect to this change that we weren't aware of or we were hoping would never happen. And so this is really normal for people to go through. I'm curious, at this point in time, you know, just notice where you might be following yourself and how you're going through these different stages. And then think about somebody close to you and notice where they might be on this change curve. So right now in my house, there's 4 of us. I would tell you there are 2 of us who are more in acceptance and 2 who are more in anger and bargaining. So it's interesting to watch how that happens. Now, what I like to lay on top of this universal response to change is also our individual preferences. So what's really interesting about individual preferences is that these are preferences. It doesn't mean you can't be competent or productive in one of the others. So, but it does follow a normal curve. And what we know about these individual preferences is we have individuals who really want more evolutionary or incremental change. We call these our conservers. And then we have the folks who like revolutionary change. They want it to be expansive. Those are our originators. I fall more into that category, and I think it's one of the reasons why I move more quickly to acceptance, because I like change. I remember I told you in the scarf drivers that uncertainty wasn't my highest one, but what I have learned is I like autonomy, which is control. So when I'm in an ambiguous situation, I look at it as an opportunity to create my own future. I like that. That's control. And then in the middle, we have our pragmatists. And the pragmatists are great because they're 50% of our population. They like to get things done, and they're going to help kind of pull along our conservers and then also try to kind of rein in our originators to move it more into implementation. So they want their change to be functional and situational. So I thought I'm going to show you a little more about each one, but before I do, I just want to check in and see if you have any questions. So this, to me, this is probably my favorite part of thinking about how we're all responding. I've seen a lot of it with my clients that I coach. So I work with individuals, but I also work with leadership teams. And just watching the individuals as they navigate this to see what are the benefits and drawbacks that exist for each one. So when we think about our conservers, of course, they don't really like the surprises. They can appear really cautious and inflexible. So think about the people that you know who are just maybe digging in their heels a little more. They want more structure. So keep that in mind because they're experiencing a lot of uncertainty. And so our job as managers is to think about how can I provide that structure for them? So something like the daily check-in with the team, that's a structure that you can give them that helps them feel a little more like, okay, you know, everything hasn't just blown up all over the place, all right? So they really value tradition. They bring a lot of best practices, and they will be very disciplined and deliberate in how they manage this change. So there's a lot that we can learn from them. There's always, like I said, there's always kind of the upside and the downside to all of these. I contrast that with our originators. They're the ones who are enjoying the risk and uncertainty. Ooh, what can I create from this? They also can be really unorganized, undisciplined. maybe unconventional and spontaneous. I'll tell you, the conservers in the world don't necessarily like listening to the originators like myself going, oh, what's the possibility, right? We could actually, there's something new that we could create. And I'm thinking, oh, I mean, literally the thoughts that have come to my head is, oh, what are all the new innovations going to be after this is all over? A year from now, I bet we see so many changes. I also think, what are the other new creations? Like, how many kids are going to be born in about 9 months as a result of this change, right? So that's where the originators go. So they're going to always challenge the existing structure. The drawback is they're not always so practical, right? We miss details, and we are not that excited about implementation. We like to sit and generate the ideas. So we could stay here a little longer, but we won't get a lot done. So fortunately, we have our pragmatists, okay? So I use this thought around here. Our pragmatists are like, hey, stop messing around and get some work done. They just want to get things done. They're practical, they're agreeable, and they will be flexible because they know how to work with both the conservers and the originators. They want the change to show some tangible, visible benefits and outcomes. And so, by gosh, by the time we're all done with this, hopefully we've created something new that's workable, right? They want it to be functional. So again, layer onto that universal response to change. Where do you see yourself fitting in that universal response to change, but where do you also see yourself fitting in here? Knowing, again, that this is a preference. It doesn't mean that if you're an originator like myself, it doesn't mean that you can't value best practices or you can't finally implement something. It just means that when you're triggered, you're more likely to go to your preference. And so to be conscious of that, and that honestly has given me over the past few weeks in interacting with my clients and specifically interacting with my own family members, it's just given me a little more grace and patience to understand that everybody's moving at their own pace. And we all might be a little bit anxious and maybe even short-tempered and not always at our best, but to have some patience with it, because as we all move through it, we'll end up in the same place together eventually. So when you think about managing your own team, the thing I want you to think about is we have this kind of ending and new beginning. In the language of organization development professionals, we often talk about it as our current state and our future state, and then we have this neutral zone. What's really interesting about this is to think about in each one of these, we have between our current state and neutral zone, we have stability and doubt that then moves into hope and capability. But then we want to think about that change curve and what do we have to be aware of? So our conservers are going to more likely stay stuck in doubt, and they will ask you a lot of detailed questions. So one of the things I always share with people is when they're asking you questions, make sure you're only providing the answers that you know to be true, but with as much detail. And if you're more of a pragmatist or originator, just be patient. That those details are important to them. Those help them to feel a little more certainty when we don't always have a lot of certainty. The pragmatists, be grateful that they will pull along our conservers but slow down the originators. The thing that you have to watch out for them is they will want 100% buy-in, and in such uncertain times, we may not be able to get that. Sometimes we just have to go with 80% of the people being on board and move forward. So know that that's the benefit that they bring, but they can get stuck there. And finally, again, as I mentioned, our originators, they're going to be reluctant to leave hope. They're not that excited about moving into implementation and actually finally, dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. So they're going to need a good pragmatist as a partner with them to get some things done. So if you find, think about where you fit and just think about what do you need, what kind of support do you need right now, and what kind of support can you give your teams with respect to working through these places where people get stuck, okay? So in here I'm giving a lot of tips that will come to you in the slides, such as, give people time to digest the change, ask for their feedback, make sure that you involve them, as well as some very specific tips for our conservers, pragmatists, and originators. And then finally, some tips around in some cases, you know, organizations that I've talked to are looking at the possibility of this change has been so monumental for their organization that they're a medium-sized company, and they may have other business changes that they need to communicate as a result. So be really clear on what you can communicate and what you can't, and what is the business rationale for it, just to help minimize rumors and anxiety. So I wanted to share those with you, and then really move into where you might have some questions around what are you noticing around what's maybe challenging with your teams or your clients. What have you tried and what have you learned so far in this? You know, we're about, what, some places we're about 2.5 weeks into our distancing. I know there in the Bay Area, you're nearly a month in to the physical distancing. But what have you been trying? And now this is when I would love you to take yourselves off mute so we can have more of a conversation.
So this is Elizabeth Pierce. I think that the happy hours are very helpful, and not just the drinking part, because we have folks that aren't. So it's just happy hour in terms of getting together, which is really great. I've also noticed that people are being really flexible to time zones, which is fantastic news. So I personally have always been really flexible to the time zones of others, especially if it's me in one and everybody else is in another. So it's been really awesome to see companies and teams and stuff flex to be more hyper aware of the different time zones and kind of embracing them, which is really great. That's been really super nice to see. Reconnection has been fantastic. And yeah, and people really focusing on like learning something new, which is awesome.
So I'm curious, Elizabeth, where are you located?
I'm in San Francisco, the Bay Area.
Okay.
Yeah, but I have, just as an example, I have a bunch of friends from college who we only see each other for at reunions every 5 years. And this particular group has decided that we want to see each other more frequently. And this is a great opportunity to do that. And since, you know, people are able to actually balance a little bit easier in terms of, you know, family requirements and stuff, because they're not like going to football games or going to like matches or, you know, carting kids around or dealing with school. It's like everything's in that one place. So, and they typically have like a partner they rely on, and they can actually like flex and say, yes, I'm going to take this hour and spend time with friends I haven't connected with in a long time, which has been really great.
That's so nice. Yeah, I was listening to one of the other Yule sessions from the other day, and she talked about, you know, social distancing. It's better just to call it physical distancing, because actually, think about from that standpoint, we may not be going into a work environment every day, but think of all the people that you're reconnecting with because of this, where we're actually we're creating or renewing social intimacy with those people because of this. So that's one of the upsides. So I love that you're noticing that as well.
Yeah, it's great.
Is it Lily or Lele?
Yeah, it's Lily. Yep.
Lily?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
And I
Okay,
noticed you taking yourself off mute. So I just wanted to
thank
see,
you. That was an accident. That was an accident. Sorry. It was an accident, but I will say one thing that I have so enjoyed is connecting with people from around the world and around the country. Hello, David. I remember seeing you a bit back last week. I've tried to hit these every day, and it just doesn't always work. I can't believe that I'm so busy in the midst of being home full time. It's kind of crazy, but there's a lot to take advantage of, such as these webinars and seminars, and I'm also life coaching online and teaching voice online. So I'm keeping busy, but I love that I'm meeting people from across the nation, and that I'm in Facebook groups with people from around the world and across the nation. And we are so united right now that it's really touching, I think.
Yeah. One of the reasons I'm so proud to be affiliated with YOL is because really the community that it attracts is very positive and focused, I think, on strengthening our bonds with each other and with the world around us. And so I just love, that was one of the reasons I wanted to really hold a conversation, is to connect with others and see what's going on. So thank you. Brian.
Well, Shannon, you've had some experience in a big tech company. At Google, we find that change is constant and is accelerating, even before this COVID-19 business. So last, I think it was November. Came back from a search. Oh, hush up, Google. So last November, I was facilitating a workshop for a team, and what they wanted to focus on is how can we manage change, or how do we approach change more effectively. And so I led them through an exercise where using your check mark graph is very similar in the sense that we had to, how do you have basically a coaching conversation with your team members, preferably in a one-on-one context, where you're helping them through the grieving process, because there's a letting go of what was, and kind of dealing with the muckiness of the change itself. But then there's an emergence at the other side, and so how do we coach them through that process? And so we had a little workshop on coaching conversations, and to kind of help team members through that process in their one-on-one conversations.
Yeah, I love where you're looking, Brian, because that whole process around a designed ending can be incredibly beneficial to a team going through change. So we all go through change in different ways. Like I mentioned, one of the things I do is I kind of hop right into the new thing, which means that I don't always close out. I don't always end as well as I could. And learning how to design an ending that both symbolizes the end of one thing, moving into a new thing, but also honors all of the capabilities and experiences people have brought to the thing that we're letting go of, I think is really, really important. So thank you.
A key point that I reinforced was people will go through this process at different rates, and they need to give them the space and support to make it through at their own rate. And that's while it might mean that they're not as effective as they could be sooner, it's in the long run it's much better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who
else? I can't see everybody. Jennifer.
Yeah, hi. So one of the things that I don't find it a challenge, I actually find it very interesting, is how, and maybe Elizabeth was talking about this as well, as how flexible people are with the working hours right now. So whereas when it used to be, most people were thinking 8 to 5 and we're a global company, but it was like, I'm in the US, I'm in Cincinnati, my 8 to 5 is this time. You're trying to schedule a meeting at 7? No, my hours are 8 to 5, my core hours, right? We know we all work different hours. But it seems to have relaxed a little bit. Like people are just on when they're there, they're taking care of what they need to. We're still moving business forward, which, sometimes I'm like, is my project really going to keep going? And it is. Like, we're doing fine moving the project forward, even though none of us are all in the same space together. And I really love that. Like, I try to prioritize this at 4 o'clock my time every day, because it's like the nice way to end my day. And my husband comes and knocks on my door and says, come on, let's go for a walk, in the morning and in the afternoon. And, usually when I'm at my desk, I don't even think about that. I'm like, no, I can't, got to get this done. But it's like, now I can go, yeah. And I'll go for a walk and I come back. There might be, a couple of people trying to get a hold of me, but they're more patient with me that I'm not there all the time. It seems, it just seems like a really nice change that was needed, is taking those mental breaks when you need to and not being so demanding on people to be there and to be on all the time.
I don't have any
Wait,
evidence.
I'm curious.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, Brian?
I don't have
Go
any
ahead, Brian.
evidence, but I suspect that this is largely driven by the fact that because my day is not as structured as it was before, and there are, you know, kids or dogs or other people in the house that might need to take some of my time during the work day. I still want to deliver a full work day, so I'll have to work outside of my normal hours. And so there's that. I think there's more give and take, more flexibility that's being granted, and then I think we're going to see this as more flexibility being expected even after the pandemic is over.
Yeah, it's the word grace. I don't know. I think you also said that, Shannon. One of my friends told me what she's practicing is giving people space and grace. And I'm like, oh, that's beautiful. And I remind myself of that sometimes, like when I feel elevated, it's like, no, we're just, like you said, we're on different paths on that change spectrum. And so sometimes even just giving that person the space and the grace versus the expectation, you put that out there in the universe and it's giving it back to me. At least I feel it's giving back to me.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. I have to say, I've really enjoyed, I have a dog. I have a 6-year-old chocolate lab who is the defender of the home and the family. And so working from home, every once in a while, you know, she's barking her head off. And, you know, up until this point, I've always felt like, oh gosh, with working from home, I have to seem as professional as possible because I just think I have to. And now I feel like I personally have more space to be more human with my clients in that regard, from the standpoint of, yep, I have a dog, and then people are like, oh yeah, so do I, don't worry about it. And I appreciate that. So I see a lot more of that. And then just also, you know, people acknowledging, like I had a client who said, hey, I don't want to put my video on because my toddler is in here. And I was like, oh my gosh, put her on. Let's say hi. Let her know that, you know, who you work with. That's awesome. And then I think it just helps, you know, bring some of the anxiety down of, I don't have to show up maybe in quite the same way. And it doesn't mean I'm not professional. It just means I'm an integrated human being that has other aspects of my life that I'm bringing to the whole, you know, and I feel better when I can bring all of myself to the party versus try to look the way I'm supposed to look for you. So I think that's kind of nice. I personally have also loved watching the evening talk show hosts to see where they live. I think that's so cool because we're starting to see their homes. And I think it's the same thing for people at work. We're getting to see a little more about somebody through the environment they live in.
yeah, I love that what you just said there. It really makes all of us more human, like, because you can see your colleagues in a different light, and it's not like they're just this person that you're working with, but they are the whole person. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I noticed we also have a couple more folks on. We, you know, have a little less than 5 minutes, but Melissa, hi, I see you there. Nice to see you. And then Stacy, and then I think that's Zanette, maybe. Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I can actually add a couple things. I've been doing a lot of coaching, so I've been hearing some things that people are dealing with right now that I can highlight. A lot of people are struggling with redefining some of their goals that they had set, with now everything changing the next couple months, how they can really, you know, redefine it into something they feel good about and they're still making progress and taking action on. So I know I've been hearing that a lot and kind of accepting it and seeing the positive and how you can change the actions you were going to do into something that's still productive and still going to be helpful in this environment. And then a lot of people are just kind of having a lot of perspective about how they lived their life before this happened and changes they might want to do afterwards. They enjoy, spending time with the kids outside and doing things with their family that they didn't have time to do before. And they want to make sure they continue this, these best practices afterwards. And then lastly, like, I know a lot of people are feeling like they're running a marathon still. They're trying to normalize their schedule. And it's been really tough. I just was talking to somebody right before the call that, she feels like she's not doing enough because of the kids and trying to put work in time and her work schedule and, trying to, do these things at different hours that it's like 24/7. So trying to give herself permission that, she has done enough in the day. And so just
that's one of the traps of working from home. That your work is always there. You don't have boundaries. So you have to get really good at establishing what the boundaries are. Yeah, I'm fortunate because I have a separate space, so I can go. Like right now, I'm sitting out on my deck. This is not where I normally sit. Although as I'm sitting, David, I want to say to you, thank you, because I rarely come out, except like if I'm writing. I don't come out onto my deck, and I'm thinking I could do a lot more of my coaching calls out here on a good day. I think I don't think of it because in Seattle we don't always have all of these good days. But, I'm lucky because I have an office and a door that I can shut, but not everybody has that. So really creating a space and then thinking about I'm going to work or, and now I'm done with work is important. Well, any final thoughts before we close?
I'm just wanting to echo the appreciation for the authenticity, the bringing my full human self that this challenge has created. I've not been feeling well at all for like the last 2 weeks, and today I'm horizontal, which is why my video is off. But being able to even just say that and the connection that brings forth when, a friend of mine was speaking this morning about how her kids are just driving her up the wall, and like she has compassion for her mom, and because she was like that when she was a little girl, and like the dimensions of ourselves that are making themselves present in professional conversation actually brings so much to our ability to trust one another and therefore to collaborate effectively in times of crisis. And I'm appreciating that, and I'm glad it came forth in what you were offering about change as well.
Thank you. Well said. Well, I just want to thank everyone for being present. Like I said, I'm making these slides, and there's a whole toolkit that I'll just highlight if I can move forward quickly. There's some additional ways to check in, tips for creating more, little information on checking in general, how to conduct a check-in, creating tips for creating more certainty, autonomy, and relatedness with your employees. And then I have more of my what I call mindfulness moments in here, and how to actually conduct them. So some of these you might already be familiar with, but I thought I would, if you haven't, I thought they would be good opportunities for people just to remind themselves what's available. And then finally, with that, I just want to highlight, I want to say Elizabeth Pierce is giving the next YOL workshop tomorrow. The topic is, I know it's about, I'm trying to remember, I remember recess being in, and the focus of it on the recess being that we all need a recess, and what we can learn from students and how they have a recess every day to kind of reset themselves. So I'm not doing it justice at all. Elizabeth, would you like to say a couple words about it since you're on the call?
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about recess and the importance of it, but also how leaders can help facilitate it as well through one-on-ones, team meetings, etc. So what does recess totally mean? Because like right now, a lot of people are like, I focus on goals, I'm doing this is what I'm doing, but we're not taking the moment of saying, I just need to either one, do nothing, or just go and work on something that is not related to anything at all. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. Thank you.
Excellent. And so I just leave you with this closing thought. Remember, back to Mandy Hale, in the midst of uncertainty, anything is possible. So I leave you with this question for you to ponder and just allow your brain to relax and ruminate on it. What becomes possible for you in the midst of this global change? And with that, thank you very much for your participation. Feel free to reach out to me when you receive the slides if you have any questions. I'm certainly more than happy to collaborate and connect with like-minded people like yourselves. So thanks very much for the opportunity to share my thinking on what is happening in our world today. And take care.
Thank you,
Bye.
Shannon.
Thank you.